Let's begin with Adam, which was a leftover item from last week.
Yeah, thanks. So this is just a short one about how we do pagination within GitLab. We know that the current way we are doing pagination can be problematic when, let's say, an API user visits a really high page number. So we had some problems that an API user requested, I don't know, a really large page size, and it spent like 10, 15 seconds in the database query. And the other part was when basically the first page load, when you visit a group level feature, a project level feature, and loading list of items, the first page load is slow because we are doing an extra count query, and we actually sorting all the records in memory to provide the first 20 items on the page. So for the offset, to replace the offset page pagination, we could do key set pagination, and we are doing this already in GraphQL. And the idea is that we could maybe adapt it more on our existing features, and maybe for new features to use key set pagination to avoid these problems in the future.
Andreas, you had some follow-up to this item.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think we had an attempt to implement keyset pagination in the REST API earlier that got stalled, so we only have it on a couple of endpoints. But it's really the way to mitigate the, let's say, the attack surface also on the API, because it's so easy to just send requests asking for very high offsets, and like Adam mentioned, having like very large long database queries. So this is great. Thanks for the write-up on this. I'm still reading into that, but that's definitely very useful.
Okay, Seth.
Yeah, maybe we can simplify this. I was worried kind of that there was no affinity as far as I could see. Like we're sharding projects in Gitly without affinity, I think. I wanted to do that by sharding or kind of by saying which Gitly server you use based on the top level namespace. Camille had a great remark that, hey, what happens if you move a project between namespaces? It won't happen that often, but it would be very, very sad if then you have to move the whole top level namespace or something like that. So I think I'm convinced. I'd love if someone would do a write-up or something like that. But I think
I did one.
Oh, cool.
Sorry, I did it this weekend and I posted it today. It's on point 2. But there's a write-up that talks about sharding and tenancy and how these two things relate, and how project sharding would essentially allow us to do tenancy in many, many different ways, like namespace or customer or whatever. So Camille, actually, he and I were chatting, and he put it in a way that I need to add to that write-up, which is a project, it's a small enough unit that we can move around fairly easily depending on what's happening up in the stack. And then if we are doing sharding by project, there isn't one way to determine where the project lands in a database shard. We can take into account wanting to balance the shards for performance, but we can also say, well, this project belongs to this namespace or this user, so these are the shards that service that namespace and that user. So think of it as tenancy in a kind of a virtual lanes where we're not building walls right off at the beginning, where you're saying, if these shards are for this customer, we're going to make that decision way up in the stack, but as it traverses down, then they're going to land on the right places. And then we can have this alignment from, from Gitly to the database to the top of the stack that allows us to say, yeah, we can do, we can put your namespace in a specific place, or we can have you as a customer that has this dedicated infrastructure. So, if you have comments on the write-up, which I hope sort of explains this thing that I just mumbled out, let me know if that actually make sense on how we can actually achieve your goals doing this and still remain very scalable and highly balanced on the back end.
I'd like to see in the blueprint, like I think the blueprint is a good start, but I'd like to see like, how do we solve the problems as, if you do the database per project, how do I get analytics over multiple projects? Do I now have to query multiple databases? How does that work? If I do search across multiple, if I have multiple tendencies, like aggregating that search is super hard because like Elasticsearch cannot make the weight. So you get the output of Elasticsearch and you have to kind of get that together at the application layer, which is not going to be as good. So those are the problems I'd like to see addressed in these proposals.
Yeah, we can do that. And you're right. That is, you know, if you're trying to aggregate projects that happen to be on different charts, then that becomes a harder problem to solve. And there are ways to solve it, but this is in the write-ups, in the blueprints, we talk about the CAP theorem, and we're going to bump our heads into it. So you may not be able to get the analytics right away, but you can get them eventually. And so this is where we start choosing what is important to us, that this query returns immediately, which is true for some queries, or that this query is slightly delayed, but more accurate. So I will add a section about that and some of the ways in which I've seen this solved in the past.
Yeah, I don't like how much we're on the theory and how little we are on the practice here.
I agree.
CAP theorem, like, who cares? Like, we have just a database on GitLab.com that we need to shard across 10 database servers. Plus, we have some customers who want to make sure that their data never leaves the EU. That's what we have to solve. And the CAP theorem tells you, like, everything has a disadvantage. And I know of one of our main competitors that is having like a lot of trouble right now because they've done the ultimate thing and the theoretical thing. And you know what? Their applications are dog slow right now. They are unusable and all their customers are complaining. So, oh, it will work, but it's just a little bit slower. That can be like a company ending thing. A company ending is a bit stark, but that can be like a huge problem for multiple years. So let's not overdo it. Let's do what we need to do to make GitLab.com scale to 10 million people, which is the goal of this working group. But if we do more than that, we have to be sure that it doesn't come with disadvantages. And if that disadvantage is speed and latency, that's a big thing. GitHub is still faster than us. And we've seen that some competitors, what happens if you overdo it? So let's not make that same mistake. And I'm very worried if we're starting to go theoretical instead of practical.
I do want to address that because I like to believe that I'm a very practical engineer. That doesn't mean that I discard theorems or whatever they're called. The whole idea of the CAP theorem here is that we're smart about things, not that we just wave the flag of, hey, I read about the CAP theorem and it's great. My point here is when we're making decisions, we should understand what the trade-offs are. That's simply what it is, and that there is some engineering and science behind them. It doesn't mean that I want to build some random perfect thing, but I do want people to understand that as we're making these decisions, some queries are going to be faster, some are going to be slower, and on those that are slower, there are ways to get around that. But we should walk into the query understanding that it's going to be slower, because what I'm trying to avoid is for us to walk into building this thing and not understanding what we're building and just saying, gosh, it's slower. Let's all rally together to make this query faster. That's being reactive. So I'm trying to just say, when we're thinking about, hey, we need to solve this analytics problem that you just brought up. Well, what do we understand about the problem and how are we going to get around it? So maybe we need to add some caching, or maybe we need to do these things. So it's not like everything I'm going to write is going to be the CAP theorem says, but it is something that sort of, I want to have some guidance on how we solve the problems. And I want people to understand that today, all queries are nearly instantaneous for some value of instantaneous because it's a single instance. But as soon as we have multiple instances per project, per namespace, per whatever you want, that changes. And we just need to have some awareness about this. So I am fully with you. I don't intend to build a time machine, but I do need some guidance to understand that how we're going to work around it. So I'll do my best to be very practical and very pragmatic and ensure that we're building the right thing and that we're doing it, we're doing iterations and we're trying to produce. But it's not going to be just writing code.
No, look, I want this solved more than anyone. And look, this is the second working group. This is 1.5 years that we could have had to get this right. And we're now with our back against the wall because we have to get this done fast. On the other hand, it's a very important decision. And if you say, look, some things are now instantaneous and they're going to be slower, I'm very worried about that because I don't think we need to shard the database per project. I think we can do it per customer and keep all those queries that are important to them, namely how's my organization doing, to keep those as fast as they are now and not take that extra hit. So Camille.
Yes, Sid, I think there is a lot of sides to that. Probably the most important aspect from my side is the blueprint that Gary is right now working on. It kind of makes it possible to put us on the same understanding of the problem. But to be honest, I kind of expect that we're gonna hit so many dead ends with the solutions that we're gonna be testing that there is no really work where a way around of testing these different things. And to be honest, we actually gonna be starting the engineering work next week because there are gonna be additional people joining. And I asked them that really the first thing that we're gonna start doing, we're gonna start running GitLab.com database in different ways, in the sortable way, and see how many of these things are broken and how many things we would have to fix in these different scenarios. Because now it's a lot of theory and in the practice, some of these things, I'm not sure if they're gonna be working properly. So I think the way to quickly iterate on that is really get this kind of fundamental thinking about the problem to be shared between us, but then we start testing these different approaches, which is we're gonna be probably testing per namespace, we're gonna be testing per project, we're gonna be testing how we can move this data freely, what impacts it's gonna have to pick actually the one that is the least of the resistance and the fastest really to implement, because GitLab is built about this kind of single database in mind, and it's gonna take a lot of tinkering to really disconnect this kind of thinking. So I'm personally, I'm not sure which one of these ways is gonna be the most efficient to do even now. I'm just kind of know that we need to test them and we need to test them very quickly. And now I know that if I start working with the people that are gonna be joining the team next week, the Gary work actually gonna be helpful to keep them on the same page for what we want to achieve as for the guarantees that we want to offer. That's kind of, I think, my perception about how we should approach this way of doing that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to me that we keep the two options open. So I'm okay with a proposal that is as Javier wants to make it, but I also want to see the proposal or the alternative to shard the database per top level namespace, and then probably Redis and Elasticsearch as well. I think those are that's a major decision, and I want to see the pros and cons of both. And I think we want to keep our mind open.
Yes, this is Fabian. So I've laid out, it's drafty right now, essentially the pros and cons for both proposals. And I think what I'm looking forward to is— Where are you looking? This is the point after you, the draft MR point 8, to summarize pros and cons. So I think what I would be looking forward to is saying, okay, Jerry has proposed this, we are in agreement that we're going to do this first, but then we're actually going to start, like Camille suggested, testing these things out and seeing how it works, but keeping our minds also open. If we hit a wall, right, and we find out that it doesn't work, that we're able to, to iterate on that and move forward. Because I think there's still also a lot of things that are not quite known, So as far as I know, for example, we know that some cross-shard queries will be slow, but I don't think we understand how many of those cross-shard queries actually exist for any given entity. And that is, these kinds of things need to be, I think, worked on.
Thanks for that. We've been working on this for 1.5 years, and both proposals that we're discussing in this meeting have been made over the weekend. Like, it feels like we're starting from scratch, even though there's been all this time spent. So I'm a bit puzzled by that. Thanks for the proposal, Fabian. I think that is great. I'm sold after Camille on the GitLab should be per project. I think that right now we're already doing search per project as well. Is that the current case? Because that would be a good way to look at the pros and cons.
Yes, search is currently shard per project. We have an open issue discussing alternatives sharding per namespace. I think both approaches have pros and cons. We need to investigate.
Where can I find more information over kind of what's gotten harder maybe now that we shard per project?
On Elastic.
So we
sorry,
have
this is.
Oh, go ahead.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I linked an issue about the other discussion here, and happy to collaborate and communicate maybe asynchronously. I know this is the database sharding working group.
Sid, this is Fabian again. I linked an issue. I just wanted to say that I think there's actually a lot of work that was done. It is a little bit scattered across quite a bit of items and handbook entries. I think, so these proposals, as far as I can tell, I'm relatively new to this. There's been a lot of prior art on it, but I think the challenge that we have here is to synthesize this information. And I think Jerry did a great job on that and saying, okay, let's take it and move forward. But I've spent a few days reading through a lot of like deep thought on many of those things. So I think people have experimented, but I think it's important to also find sort of an exit point and say, okay, this is sort of proposal A, let's try and iterate on it and see what walls we hit.
Thanks for that. I'm looking at sharding GitLab by root namespace. I'm puzzled even by the name, like the root namespace. There's one root namespace, right? That was going to be kind of our workspace. People use root namespace and workspace interchangeably. The other thing that I think people mean when they say root namespace here means top level namespace.
You're right. That relates back to what we wrote a year ago, I think, and at that time we were talking about the root namespace, but that has changed, I guess, over time.
Yeah, so this means this should be changed to top-level namespace now. Okay, there's like many different proposals, many different things, and I think even the most recent proposals don't have a clear articulation of like, these are the problems we'll run into, this is the trade-off we have to make, etc. So I think we got a lot of work to do in a very little time here.
This is very correct. We have a lot of work and also a lot of people like to be joining to help out with this being done.
Yes, we have a lot of work, and there is a ton of information. And as the DRI for the working group, I will make sure that it's sorted and dealt with appropriately.
Jerry, I'm also happy to support and summarize these proposals in a digestible way, so that we have a good overview of pros and cons. Because I think a lot of the information is already there. But there's also, as Camille said, a lot of unknowns that I think will only surface by moving forward.
Yeah, and to add to that, the team that is going to be focusing on this is starting to be constituted this week. So Camille is already starting to think about this essentially full time. So we will have some answers for you, some more concrete answers for you shortly. So.
Cool. What I'm super interested in is like I'm sold on Gitly being per project. I'm not sold on Redis, Elasticsearch, and the database per project. I think it should be per top level namespace, but I think we should just, it's a big decision. So we should have, we should have that trade-off clear, and that should include like, what is the percentage of queries? How much slower will they be? But also the advantages of sharding per project, like how much easier is it to move, etc.
Some of that we already have. Like the latter stuff we've already outlined. The early stuff, percentage of queries, etc. We need to go and find and put in writing. So we will get that.
Cool. Yeah, and then also like, hey, Elasticsearch, if we have to do combined results in the application layer, the results get this much slower, this much worse, etc.
Will do. Okay, is point E, I take to be a part of the conversation we just had in terms of regional, which I think is another vector for the sharding conversation. We have 2 minutes. Do we want to go through F and G real quick? F2.
F actually, we have a few architecture issues from the rapid actions recently. So I just created a search here, so we can probably investigate whether they fit into one of our work tracks, like the data patterns. One of those may be a good place to hold these items there. So just to bring up to attention, then the DRIs from the work tracks from the data patterns research can take a look and consider if any of those issues will fit into one of our data patterns to work on here. Otherwise, we may find another solution here to host these issues.
Okay.
Okay.
Fabian.
I'll vocalize G very quickly. If you want to read something really interesting, the paper linked here is about the bias of people to solve problems by adding new things rather than by removing them. And I was just wondering, in a general sort of scalability discussion, if there are opportunities in GitLab to just remove certain things from the database or at other points to make scaling easier. It's more of a thought provocation, whatever the English word is. Go read it, it's cool.
Excellent. We're at time. Thank you, everyone. See you Wednesday.